our Stop Wishing, Start Writing book club. And boy, are we in a treat tonight. We are going to be sharing our takeaways and insights and epiphanies from Stephen King's book. And let's learn a little bit about the book. Entertainment Weekly said, "Long live the king," when it was published. And Cleveland Plain Dealer called it the best book on writing ever. Michael Chabon said, "This is a special book, animated by a unique intelligence and filled with useful truth." Aren't those, you know that a writer wrote that endorsement, right? Animated by unique intelligence is 1, 2, 3, that's 5 words, and there's not a common word in there, you know? I mean, it's very precise and so illustrative. And then useful truth, not just truth, but useful truth. And the Wall Street Journal said it is a one-of-a-kind classic. And boy, I agree. I've pulled out 5 different passages that I think demonstrate the brilliance of Stephen King and what a gift this book is. And I can't wait to open it up for Q&A and hear your insights and takeaways, especially how it's impacted your writing. Has it changed your process, or has it re-energized you, or helped you recommit? So once again, I am Samhorn. This is our Stop Wishing, Start Writing community. So glad that you've joined us. And I hope that you have pen and paper, because we are going to jump right in with a passage that's on 103, page 103, if you have your book with you and you want to kind of read along, because this insight, like I ran the Maui Writers Conference for 17 years. I've been helping people with their books for more than 20 years. I've written books for more than 30 years, and I have never heard anyone say this. Ready? On page 103, he says, "What writing is." That's the title. And then he says 3 words. Ready? Telepathy, of course. Wow, writing is telepathy. Who knew? And yet, as soon as he says it, doesn't it make sense? Now, he goes along, he said, telepathy, of course, it's amusing when you stop to think about it. For years, people have argued about whether or not a thing exists. Folks like J.B. Ryan have busted their brains trying to create a valid testing process to isolate it, and all the time it's been lying right there out in the open, like Mr. Poe's purloined letter. All the arts depend on telepathy to some degree, but I believe that writing offers the purest distillation. Perhaps I'm prejudiced, but even if I am, we may as well stick with writing, since it's what we came here to think about and talk about. Then in that chapter, in the next few pages, one of the reasons he thinks that books are where we go to receive telepathic messages, because books are a uniquely portable magic. Woo-hoo! Once again, books are a uniquely portable magic. Now, he says that he listens to books and reads books wherever he goes, because you just never know when you'll want an escape hatch. Mile-long lines at toll booth plazas, the 15 minutes you have to spend in the hall of some boring college building waiting for your advisor, who got some yank off in there threatening to commit suicide because he or she is flunking. And airport boarding lounges, laundromats on rainy afternoons, and the absolute worst, which is the doctor's office when the guy is running late and you have to wait a half an hour in order to have something sensitive mauled. At such times, I find a book vital. And if I have to spend time in purgatory before going to one place or the other, I guess I'll be all right, as long as there's a lending library. One thing that Stephen King demonstrates to us, it's about the rhythm, not the grammar. That's a long sentence, right, with commas and semicolons and so forth. But the flow is there. The force is there. He was swept up writing it, and we were swept up reading it. And he said, okay, so let's assume you're in your favorite receiving place, just as I am, where I do my best transmitting. Now, by the way, have you ever thought about where you write as where you transmit your telepathy? He said, we'll have to perform our mentalist routine, not just over distance, but over time as well. Yet that presents no real problem. If we can still read Dickens and Shakespeare, I think we can manage the gap between 1997 and 2000. So here we go. Telepathy in action. You'll notice I have nothing up my sleeves and that my lips never move. Neither, most likely, do yours. And then he describes the room. He describes the small fish aquarium. He describes the table with the red cloth. He describes a cage with a white rabbit with the pink nose and pink rimmed eyes. And decorative souls may add a little lace and welcome. Your tablecloth is my tablecloth. Knock yourself out. So he goes on and he says, that this is what we're looking for, and we all see it. I never opened my mouth, and you never opened yours. We're not even in the same year together, let alone the same room, except we are together. We're having a meeting of the minds. Oh, it's poetry. Have you ever thought about that? About what you transmit could be received from people, of course, weeks or months or years from now, and you are having a meeting of the minds. What a gift and a privilege it is to do this thing called writing, right? Okay, enough for me and enough from him right now. We'll get to another section in a moment, but let's toss it over to you. And I would like to either hear your comments about that, how it impacts you, or a favorite takeaway from the book and a line or an insight that just really stuck with you and why. So who's going to start us off? Just put your hand up, unmute us, and rock and roll. Here we go. Corinne, did I see you put your hand up and go?
I did.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
I was just going to comment that I absolutely love that no words or, space is necessary to have this meeting of the minds. And I like the idea of it being a portable sort of gift that my reader might, have. To me, that's a great positioning when I'm actually writing and thinking about serving that client at the highest.
Yeah, well said. Catherine, I think I saw you start to say something. And then Colette has something to say too. So Catherine, you're next, and then Colette, please.
I have to confess, I haven't read his whole book today. I just got it out of the library and started at the beginning.
Okay, but what do you think so far?
I like it so far. I like that at the very beginning, he says, honesty is the best policy. Liars prosper.
Yeah, there's lots of contradictions, and boy, does he have a sense of humor. So, Colette, were you going to say something?
I was just adjusting my glasses, but I just love that. And you shared this excerpt about his quote about life isn't a support system for art and how it's the other way around. And I know when we connected, how many books are written on this, and now how many medical studies and scientific studies are done on this and the need for art in the world.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, the more chaotic our world gets, the more uncertain and the more darkness in our world, the more need for the lightness that comes with art, right? Whether it's written or painted or danced or sung or played.
And just I don't read Stephen King. I'm not a horror fan, so but just never the person I would expect to get that life lesson from. So
a little comment about Stephen King is that many of you know that he was at least originally categorized as a horror writer. And it's interesting because while he did not speak at my writers conference himself, Dave Barry, Mitch Albom, Bradley Pearson, Ridley Pearson, and a number of people in the Rock Bottom Remainders, which is the rock band that he's a part of, came several years, performed, etc. And Dave Barry loved to tell a story about Stephen King, because everyone thinks whoever writes stuff like that must be like kind of a scary guy, right? He plays softball. He's a wonderful guy, wonderful sense of humor. And Stephen King likes to poke fun at himself because, at book signings, when people will make an assumption about his character based on what he writes, he says, I just can't believe you say that. He says, I have the heart of a small boy. I keep it in a jar on my desk. And who else would like to share their reactions to the book or something? Please, Don, let's hear from you.
Yes, thank you, Sam. The thing that strikes me in what you read and the stuff that I read of his, as you say, it's not necessarily grammatical, but boy, you can hear the voice on the page. I mean, that's a rare ability right there. So as you read those words, it's like he's talking to you. So that goes along so strongly with that idea of telepathy. You don't have to move your lips, but the voice in your head. And that just really struck me as you were going through that.
Isn't, Don, what you said and it's unapologetic. I think that especially people who read him a lot or people who know him, you could read 2 pages, from 100 authors, and they would be able to tell you that's Stephen King, because it's such a distinctive voice. It is so a reflection of who he is at his core, his personality, the way he thinks, the way he talks. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And Garrison Keillor is kind of like that too. They talk. I don't know if they talk the way they write or write the way they talk, but it sure is consistent.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Hopefully that's what we strive for as well, is that if we're going to write, how can we not be, I coined a new word recently. It's a clatitude. It's half cliche and half platitude. It's a clatitude. So how can we not be a clatitude, is to not abandon our voice, to try and sound smart or impressive, or to not try to do anything other than exactly where we are and who we are, right? So, okay, so let's go on to a next session. If you have other comments, hang on to them because you'll have time next time. Now let's go to page 173, because he talks about description here. And, many of the people in our group write nonfiction. However, I really believe in novelizing our nonfiction. I think we have talked before about starting every chapter with a story or a real life example to put people in the scene. That makes a page turner. That's what people finish a page, a chapter, and they look at the beginning of the next chapter. And if it's explanation, they put the book down. Who knows if they come back? If it's a story, a put you in the scene story, then they keep reading. And that's when they say, I couldn't put the book down. So here's what Stephen King has to say about description. Description is what makes the reader a sensory participant in the story. That's where the telepathy, right? That's how people can see what we're saying. That's why they're with us, even though they're years or miles apart, is because they are a sensory participant. Good description is a learned skill. One of the prime reasons why you cannot succeed unless you read and write a lot. It's not just a question of how to, you see, it's also a question of how much to. Reading will help you answer how much, and only reams of writing will help you with the how. You can only learn by doing. But he gives a tip here. He says description begins with visualization of what it is you want the reader to experience. So please think of something you write now. Are you working on a blog? Are you working on a chapter? Are you working on a description? who is your reader? Who's your ideal reader? Not anyone between the age of 30 and 50, no, who's your reader? Is this a 35-year-old mom? She's got 2 kids under the age of 10, and she's working a full-time job, and she's often exhausted and running on empty. And so who is your reader, so that you can feel what they feel? You can feel their wishes and their worries and their concerns. And all right. Now, what do you want that person to experience reading this blog? Do you want them to experience relief that they're not alone? Do you want them to experience excitement and feel encouraged that they can do this? Do you want them to feel grateful that you're sharing a cautionary tale, that they don't have to commit this trial and terror learning or mistake? So what do you want them to experience? Okay. And it ends with translating what you see in your mind into words on the page. By the way, this is where flow comes in. If we see our reader, we see what we want them to feel and experience, and now we're seeing it with our mind. Now's the time to write fast. Get it down, get it down, get it down, get it down. Do not criticize. Do not second guess. Do not question. Just flow, flow, flow. Get it out of that mind and onto the page. And as I've said, we've all heard someone say, man, it was so great or so horrible or strange or funny. I just can't describe it. If you want to be a successful writer, you must be able to describe it, and in a way that will cause your readers to prickle with recognition. Woo-hoo! Once again, right? That's the connective tissue of telepathy, is we write it in a way the reader sees it. They've thought that, they've worried about that, they've wanted that, they've experienced it. And that's the connective tissue when they're not so alone. They see what we're seeing and we're one. That's the meeting of the minds and the hearts and the soul. All right. If you can do this, you will be paid for your labors, and deservedly so. And if you can't, you're going to collect a lot of rejection slips and perhaps explore a career in the fascinating world of telemarketing. So what he just said really is the key to being a successful writer, is our ability to have sensory description that sets up this telepathy, this connection with readers where they're seeing it and feeling it and agreeing with it, or one with it, or in alignment with it, or even shocked by it, but at least they're paying attention to it, right? Okay, let me put a sock in it. Now come back to you and your thoughts about how do you make this telepathy happen? How do you help your readers see what you're saying? What do you do? What's your technique? Who'd like to share? Okay, Catherine, go. Let's hear.
Just put this in your in the book Facebook post. So today I was at the gym, and afterwards I've been working on the story and I'm stuck. And so I did my 3rd place at the cafeteria, and I just had this flyer because I hadn't brought my notebook. But how do you explain things? Well, you just write a bunch of crap, even if it's on a silly piece of paper, because then it's just fine to write crap, until you can actually explain it in a way that flows off the tongue and flows out your fingers with your pen on the paper. So you might have to explain it 10 times to yourself until you get it where it's going to be the thing that the reader wants to read.
Catherine, and if you were able to see, that's on like a piece of note paper from your Pilates place, right?
Yeah, it is. I started on the back, but then the back, I should have started on the front where all the crap was, because this is all crap. And mostly this is too, but then the ideas started coming. But, that's the only piece of paper I had. Then I came home and I wrote it down, the good stuff.
What a lovely example of like, when jot the thoughts when they're hot, right? Muse it so you don't lose it. Ink it when you think it, because when you're flush with something, I love that word flush. It means that this idea wants to be born. It's burst in your brain. It has a sense of urgency to it. And if we start writing like you did, I could see you were just squeezing it in, without trying to make it sense, or you were just so swept up in it. That's the old Robert Frost, no joy in the writer, no joy in the reader. But when you write with that in the rush of the moment like that, people will get your voice loud and clear. Good. Who else? How do you get that sensory description so your work comes alive?
I'll share. I think about things deeply. I feel things deeply. And so what spurs me to action is to think about what kind of problem is my client going through. And I talk about this in negotiation, that the negotiator's dilemma is what I call it. When interests are pulling us together, but differences are pulling us apart, and sort of that resistance. So sometimes I'll think of a problem and I'll think, oh, here's a solution. I'm going to write it down. Or I think about, what have they misunderstood? How can I help them think about this more clearly? For example, more often than not, I hear, Corinne, all I need to know is if you need to just put your tagline for your book and how to help women get what they want when they want it. Of course, I don't only teach women, but there's a misunderstanding there. Therein lies a bit of the challenge, right? They're not thinking about how they can give and how they can create an outcome that serves everyone. So those types of things, that kind of resistance, either on their part or what I acknowledge or see as a challenge, that spurs me to write.
Yeah, that's why you're a woman on a mission around this, right?
I am.
Yeah, good. Other comments about description, and then we're going to move on to another brilliant passage from Stephen King's book. Okay, please, good. And Trish, it's so good to see you. Okay, I'm going to have a 60-second memory here. Trish, how long ago was that? Was that 15 years ago, maybe?
So my book, it would be the 10-year anniversary that it got, that it was out into the world this year. And so it was a couple years before that. So it's going to be like 12, maybe 13 years.
Okay, well, let's go with 12. Well, it's one of the wonderful things about a writing community is that you connect, and Trish was working on her wonderful book. Now look at Trish's last name and guess what the name of her book is. Trish, the name of your book is?
It's why me, why now, why not? Finding opportunity in your obstacles.
Why not play on her name? Yes, excellent. So we had a wonderful writing retreat in Reston, Virginia with just, I'm partial, smart, talented, interesting people. So Trish, it's wonderful to see you again. So both share your comment and then give us an update on the 10th anniversary of your book, please.
Okay, great. So my comment is, so the book I'm working on now is about really how stories make such great teachers. So I'm teaching through stories. And so this book was fantastic for me. And for me, my description is, what I do is I'll start a story by describing what's going on outside of ourselves. And people can usually relate, and they'll say it's a situation between a couple, they'll take somebody's side based on what it stirs up for them. And then I turn it around and help them to see that there's a whole nother way of looking at the story. So it's like, I feel like telling them what's going on outside helps them to relate. And then we bring it in to how they're unknowingly contributing.
Boy, and you have a working title that you can share?
I do. You ready?
Let's hear.
It's OMG, it's me.
And the theme continues. Okay, so Trish, give us an update on the 10th anniversary of your book.
Okay, so you know, I realized, oh my gosh, this year it's 10 years, and I've been intermittently working on this other book, but I put it down for a couple of years, which I did with the other one. So that kind of gave me the momentum to pick this one up. But I also, because I'm a holistic counselor, you know, I had a platform, and and my clients, I've had some, they love the book because it gives them something to read in between our sessions. And I'm thinking I might want to do a second edition, which add a little bit to some of what I wrote before. So I'm thinking about doing that too. But I have a fun, quick story about, how people find out about your book. Because I didn't do a huge job of marketing it, like I said, because it's more my clients. But anyways, Jeffrey, that was at our retreat, said that he told me the story that his wife, her brother had come to visit from Massachusetts, and somehow my name came up because Jeffrey and I have kept in touch, and so we call each other like our brother and sister from another mother. And so he mentioned my last name, why not? And so his wife's brother is like, why not? Like, Trish, why not? He said, yeah. And he said, about the retreat. And he said, I have that book on my nightstand.
You know what? You cannot make these stories up. And it is such a testimony to, once again, you're a holistic counselor. And I know that people had asked you to please write the book because they were getting so much value from the sessions and they wanted more from you. It's and I really encourage you to update the book because, social media didn't even exist, 12 years ago, right? There's just what I find, that's why I'm updating the Tung Fu book, is that more than 50% of the copy is going to be new. It's just so much exists now that was not around back then.
Right.
So it really can be a new take.
Yeah.
So, hey, Trish,
Exactly.
before we move on, also, could you share in the Facebook community group, I think of Trish as like the female Henry David Thoreau with your love of lakes and your imagery. And we have talked about when you're an authorpreneur, you get to bring all of yourself to the table. You don't just do counseling. You're not just an author. So Trish takes her love of this lake that she lives by and her incredible nature photography, and she publishes these photos with comments on it or stories about it. And then she even has a little contest toward the end of the year to ask people to rate their favorite pictures. And then she turns it into a calendar that keeps her insight in mind. Now, is that smart or what? She's doing what she's loved. She's sharing it. She's staying connected and on the radar screen of her clients in a way that adds value. So, Trish, you are a walking, talking example of an entrepreneur.
Thanks. And actually, I just wrote a book for my granddaughter that I put my photos, and I used the tune to my favorite things from The Sound of Music, and I changed the words to go with the photos, and I made a book for her, and I'm so excited about it. I want to do more with that kind of stuff.
Good. Well, it's so please share that in the community. One of the goals of our community is that when pilots can't be up in the air flying, they do something called hangar flying. They hang out in the flyers and they talk about flying. So see, we're authors. And when we get to talk with other authors about things that have worked for them, things that have helped their books be a success, it just creates a rising tide community. So welcome again, Trish.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Sam.
let's go on to page 248 in our book. And 248 is an insight into how Stephen King thinks. He says, okay, one matter needs to be discussed, a matter that bears directly on writing being a life changer, and one I've touched on already, but indirectly. Now I'd like to face it head on. It's a question people ask in different ways. Sometimes it comes out polite and sometimes it comes out rough, but it always amounts to the same thing. Do you do it for the money, honey? And the answer is no. Don't now and never did. Yes, I've made a great deal of dough from my fiction, but I never set a single word down on paper with the thought of being paid for it. I have done some work as favors for friends. At the very worst, I have written because it fulfilled me, because it paid off the mortgage and it got the kids through the college. But those things are on the side. I did it for the buzz. I did it for the pure joy of the thing. And if you can do it for joy, you can do it forever. There have been times when, for me, the act of writing has been a little act of faith, a spit in the eye of despair. And the second half of this book was written in that spirit. I gutted it out, as we used to say when we were kids. Writing is not life, but I think that sometimes it can be a way back to life. That was something I found in the summer of 1999 when a man driving a blue van almost killed me. So that's a quarter of one page and a half of another page. That's 3/4 of a page. And yet think of the depth of insight in that page. He addresses one of the biggest questions about writing is like, do we do it for the money? And he is saying never. You know, he's made money and he's been able to pay some bills and put some kids through college, but that was never the purpose. As he said, I did it for the pure joy of the thing. And when you can do it for joy, you can do it forever. So I'm watching our time because I know we've got about 15 minutes left. So before we move on, though, is writing a joy for you? And if it becomes hard work, how do you get back to the place where you see it as a blessing and as a gift, and you receive it as such and are really grateful for it? We'd like to share. Colette, can I call on you? I see the wheels in your head turning. I know you have something to say about this.
I'm always a talker, so I try and stay behind. It's interesting. I got really into writing through Julie Cameron's morning pages, and I was doing them as a form of journaling before I knew they existed. Mm-hmm. And I think even tying it in is I only write from the heart. Like I go in and I'm like, what am I feeling? And that's where I write from. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have to ask me to write a 6-page I'm like right now I'm working on some legal documentation and I have to write these stories for the legal backup documents and it's draining. But when I write there, I could do it all day if I didn't have further obligations. And I don't think I've hit this point yet where I feel that it's work because I do it for pure joy. But even when you're sharing a bit about this, the prickle with recognition really stuck out for me, because then when I've shared in group what I've written, I see that in the listeners, that they're recognizing themselves in the feelings or the stories I've shared.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it, I know this is unscientific. It's just when people's eyes light up, their pupils actually dilate. That is the prickle of recognition. It is a bodily, visceral reaction where it's like, wow, I get it. Or, oh my goodness, that's happened to me. We call it when people's eyes light up. And also though, it's when their pupils dilate is that moment of the prickle of recognition.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Someone else before we move on about, Don, let's hear from you, please.
This is getting to my heart, I guess I would say. I've always been a writer. I started writing when I was 14 years old, and I've done it for love. And then I started making part and then all of my living as a writer. And I got to a place to where if I wasn't getting paid for it, I wasn't going to write. And then later on, we have a severely disabled daughter. She's 18 years old now. But in her early days, when I would be taking care of her, I would try to write. And it was a sentence or two, and then an interruption, and then a sentence or two, and then an interruption. And I just couldn't quite pull it out. So I hung it up for a while. And when I came back to it, I found it was sort of like the well had gone dry. It wasn't writer's block, because I know how to deal with that when you're on deadline. You've got to, but it was like there just wasn't anything there anymore. Now, last 2 or 3 years, it's been kind of coming back, but it's almost like an old potted plant that has died and the dirt, is dried out.
Wow.
And then there'll be a little green sprig that will start to come up. So I'm looking at nurturing that again. But all of a sudden, I've quit making fun of people who say they have writer's block. It may not be block. It may just be a dried up heart,
Whew, Don. I will share in Facebook group tomorrow two of the best podcasts I've heard on writing ever in my life. And I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but it's Mark Manson of, The Art of Not Giving a Subtle F, and James Clear, Atomic Habits, David Perel with Rite of Passage, and Tim Urban, Wait But Why. And they were interviewed on the Brains podcast. And why I'm going to share it, Don, is because they all talk about where they get their ideas. And they say it a lot more eloquently than I do. I have always found that when I get outside of my genre and I watch CBS Sunday Morning and I read the Sunday New York Times, I will always find ideas because we're, riffing off other people's work that's not familiar to us, right? Other genres. By the way, hey, Don, can we take 60 more seconds? Didn't you write something today about libraries?
Yes, I did. It was a comment on one of your LinkedIn posts. So yeah.
Okay. You know what, folks? It was National Library Week last week, and I imagine we were all impacted by libraries and librarians and books. What you wrote was so eloquent, Don. Do you remember what you said in that, please?
I can probably remember the gist of it. It was about that age that I was talking about. I was a poor student for the first probably 5 grades. But I discovered that it was possible to read something that teachers didn't make you read. And I discovered in my little rural hometown in West Tennessee, we had a kind of a hole in the wall public library, but they had a huge selection of science fiction. And so I can tell you the first book that I read that nobody made me read, it was Robert A. Heinlein's, Podcane of Mars was the second one, Have Spacesuit Will Travel. And that just took me to other worlds. So I became, as I said, I think a platonic, passionate relationship with the librarians. And that's what led me to writing as a profession. So that was my change. That's the origin story.
Yeah. Okay, now we have an assignment. You didn't know that the book club comes with an assignment. However, the assignment is, please take a moment and later after our program or tomorrow, write down, were you a library kid? And if so, what role did the library play in your life? What did books do for you? How have they impacted you? Like Dawn said, are they ultimately because you became a writer, because you loved books so much and you wanted to do your own? So please just take a couple minutes and share your insights about the library, if you would. Okay, 2 more things. Also on, let's see, on page, okay, here we go. Okay, please just listen to the description of this, because he tells the story of what happened when that man driving the blue van ran into him when he was just walking on the side of the road. And I remember that very well. Anyway, so please note, remember the lead-in line, a man driving a blue van almost killed me. Think about the word blue. Think about, he could have said, when it was something I found out in the summer of 1999 when I almost died. But do you remember what he said about sensory visual description? When I almost died, there's no scene there. We don't know how it happened. We can't picture it. It's too opaque, and too vague. So the power of a man driving a blue van. And are we using those types of one-word descriptions that helps people see what we're saying and set up the telepathy? And now just listen to the art of Stephen King. When we're at our summer house in Western Maine, I walk 4 miles every day, unless it's pouring down rain. 3 miles of this walk are on dirt roads, which wind through the woods. The third week in June of 1999 was an extraordinarily happy one for my wife and me. Our kids, now grown and scattered across the country, were all home. It was the first time in nearly 6 months we'd all been under the same roof. And as an extra bonus, our first grandchild was in the house, 3 months old and happily jerking at a helium balloon tied to his foot. On the 19th of June, I drove our younger son to the Portland Jetport, where he got a flight back to New York. I drove home, had a brief nap, and then set out on my usual walk. We were planning to go see the general's daughter in nearby New Hampshire that evening, and I thought I had just enough time to get my walk in before packing everyone up for the trip. I set out around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as well as I can remember. And just before reaching the main wood, I stepped into the woods and urinated. It was 2 months before I was able to take another leak standing up. Now, by the way, he deliberately chose to take us out of the story in a moment to foreshadow, right? As opposed to staying in the story. So that is when we're in a story, we all make deliberate decisions about, is there a detail important enough for me to mention it, even though it may pull people out of the story? That's always a delicate determination. When I reached the highway, I turned north, walking on the gravel shoulder against traffic. About 3/4 of a mile along, a woman observed, the woman driving the car observed a light blue Dodge van heading south. And the van was looping from one side of the road to the other, barely under the driver's control. The woman in the car turned to her passenger when they were safely past the wandering van and said, "That was Stephen King walking back there. I sure hope that guy in the van doesn't hit him." Most of the sight lines along the mile of Route 5 where I walk are good, but there is one stretch, a short, steep hill, where a pedestrian walking north can see very little of what might be coming his way. And I was 3/4 of the way up that hill when Brian Smith, the owner and operator of a Dodge van, came over the crest. He wasn't on the road. He was on the shoulder, my shoulder. I had perhaps 3/4 of a second to register this. It was just time enough to think, my God, I'm going to get hit by a school bus. And I started to turn to my left, and there's a break in my memory here. On the other side of that break in my memory, I'm on the ground looking at the back of the van, which is now pulled off the road and tilted to one side. This recollection is very sharp and clear, more like a snapshot than a memory. There is dust around the van's tailgates. The license plate and the back windows are dirty. I register these with no thought that I've been in an accident. It's a snapshot, that's it. I'm not thinking my head has been swooped clean. There's another little break in my memory here, and then I'm carefully wiping palmfuls of blood out of my eyes with my left hand. When my eyes are reasonably clear, I look around and see a man sitting on a nearby rock. He has a cane drawn across his lap, and this is Brian Smith, 42 years of age, the man who hit me with his van. Smith has quite the driving record. He has racked up nearly a dozen vehicle-related offenses. Smith wasn't looking at the road on the afternoon our lives came together because his Rottweiler had jumped from the rear of his van into the back seat area where there was an igloo cooler with some meat stored inside. The Rottweiler's name is Bullet. Smith has another Rottweiler at home named Pistol. Bullet started to nose at the lid of the cooler. Smith turned around and tried to push Bullet away, and he was still looking at him and pushing his head away from the cooler when he came over the top of the knoll, still looking, still pushing when he struck me. Smith later told friends that he thought he'd hit a small deer until he noticed my bloody spectacles lying on the front seat of his van. They were knocked from my face when I tried to get out of his way. The frames were bent and twisted, but the lens were unbroken. They are the lens I'm wearing now. Smith sees I won't read the whole thing, except that he sees that I'm awake, tells me help is on the way. He speaks calmly, even cheerily. His look as he sits on the rock is one of pleasant commiseration. Ain't the two of us had the shitty luck, it says. He and Bullet left the campground where they were staying, he later tells an investigator, because he wanted some of those Mars's bars they have up at the store. And when I hear that little detail some weeks later, it occurs to me that I have nearly been killed by a character right out of one of my own novels. It's almost funny. Now, he goes into detail. He even talks about his surgery, many surgeries, broken legs, constant pain for 2 years. He had struggled with addiction before, and he had to fight every single day not to go down that path again on pain medication. And he even talks about when the man who was driving the car went to court and essentially was reduced to driving endangerment with 6 months probation and never spent a day in jail, and is back out on the road a few months later. So the thing is, though, is that if we want to describe something, we do what he did. We put ourselves back in the scene and we just relive it. We relive it moment by moment, everything that we can remember, even when it doesn't seem to be important, because like his glasses, right, in the van that he's now wearing, they become important. So now let's wrap up this with something that is so profound, because he talks about how hard it was to write this book, because he was in pain every single day. He didn't want to write. He could hardly sit still. He couldn't stand. He couldn't sit. He couldn't lay down. He couldn't walk. But he knew that writing would be a salvation. And he said, things have continued to get better. I've had 2 more operations on my leg. I've had a very serious bout of infection, and I continue to take roughly 100 pills a day. But I continued to write. On some days, that writing is a pretty grim slog. On others, more and more, as my leg begins to heal and my mind reaccustoms itself to its old routine, I feel that buzz of happiness, that sense of having found the right words and put them in a line. It's like lifting off in an airplane. You're on the ground, you're on the ground, you're on the ground, and then you're up, riding on a magical cushion of air, and prince of all you survey. I still don't have much strength. I can do a little less of what I was able to do in a day, but I've had enough to get me to the end of this book, and for that I'm grateful. Writing did not save my life. Dr. David Brown's skill and my wife's loving care did that. But it has continued to do what it has always done. It makes my life a brighter and more pleasant place. You know what? When we sit down to write next, and if the words aren't coming, or it's a little hard or challenging, think about Stephen King. And think about him writing, even in pain, even when dealing with darkness, and how it brought him back to life, and it made his life a little brighter and a little more pleasant. And we've got just a few minutes. So any comments from you about, has writing brought you back to life, or how has it made your life a little brighter or a little more pleasant, or given you a reason and a purpose to get up and share what you've gone through in the hopes that it might add value for others?
I'll share real quick.
And then Trish, and then Kendra, I'm going to call on you. Yes, Kendra, you've been voluntold.
I'll just say briefly that when I write, I have a story. I have stories that I write down. So that helps me get into the flow. And the descriptive piece is something I spend a lot of time on in my story journal. So I liked when he said about the 3/4 of a second and to think, because it makes me think I need to write like what I was thinking at the time, or like if I was mad at God at the time and I was like fist in the air, I'll say that. And then what it means for me is that, wow, now I can feel like more of a resilient person, and hopefully my readers will feel that way too, because maybe they've gone through some things and they've lived through it.
Well said, Corinne. Trish, and then Kendra.
Okay, so with my first book, I probably the first one that read it, like not because I was writing it, editing it, but shortly after it was out and I had it in paperback, I went through a betrayal from a friend, and I was just so like traumatized by it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I need to read something. I need to like help myself process through it. And then I realized, oh my gosh, my book. And so I feel like I kind of, the thoughts that I had put down when I was in the throes of emotion were just so valuable to me that it was so powerful. So from there, I really feel like, what we write, it's like we're really, and I believe, I don't remember exactly how Stephen King had said that, but basically that we do write for ourselves, and then anybody else that benefits from our writing. But so I literally had firsthand experience with that.
Isn't it wonderful when you reread what you wrote and you thought, this is pretty good.
Exactly.
Good. So Kendra, I know that you've been writing on Facebook and so forth. So thoughts about the role that writing plays in your life, please.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I've never really considered myself to be a writer. I look at you all and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Or I'm on these calls a lot. But recently I added it on my LinkedIn profile that I'm a writer and I'm a speaker, and just kind of trying to get that out there. And I think maybe one of the posts that you've been talking about was something that I wrote when I was going through a really hard time. And I wrote it in the moment and I didn't share it for probably about a year until I was kind of out of that situation. And I thought, oh geez, this is like very vulnerable, and I thought, friends and crossover people will read it. And it was just it was a vulnerable share. And so I was like, whatever, I'm just going to get out there, just get it off my chest and put it out there, and had such good feedback from it that it was like, and so many people contacted me saying how inspirational it was and said things to me that I never really thought of myself as, so yeah, it really did make me realize that a lot of people go through the same situations and a lot of people have the same similar feelings and just in differing levels, and just putting it out there in a way that other people can connect with, and how much more deeper connections I've made with even just Facebook friends. Some of these friends I've never even met in real life, so yeah, it has definitely changed the way that I think about myself and just getting more out there and writing and thinking of myself more as a writer makes me feel good, and it makes me feel really happy that I can connect with other people and share those experiences that I went through and help somebody else that might be going through them too. So
you know what, it's thank you for bringing us full circle, Kendra. We started off with insight from Stephen King's book about, why do we write? Well, that's why we write, is in the hopes that whatever we've gone through, if we share it honestly, that other people will resonate with it, and we will create telepathy, and we will have that connection, which is, as E.M. Forster was asked at the end of his life, the meaning of life, and he said 2 words: only connect. I'm glad we've connected on this book club. I hope you'll join us for our next Inside the Author Studio interview. It'll be with Keon Gohar. And if you've heard of X Prize or if you've heard of Singularity U, Keon ran both of those organizations. He also has just co-authored a Wall Street Journal bestseller, a new work in the new world, competing with new work in the new world with Keith Ferrazzi. And he'll be sharing some of his best practices, including what's it like to co-author with someone on a book. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Hope you found this interesting and useful, and hope that you've enjoyed these takeaways from the brilliant Stephen King on writing. Until next time, write on.